Megan, just go. Oh my goodness. He's in the back, tells the world that he's given it. So I said, hey, this morning, I said, Henry, congratulations, you're now pressed. You're giving your entire collection.
By the way, there was a good article in the Buffalo paper.
Really?
I got it in there, a copy for you. Good.
You're in the program. Did everybody get one of these pieces? This is something that you're going to wow your teachers. You're going to quote words from Robert H. Jackson, and you're going to get extra credit. Sherman, Westfield, Jamestown, all together at the Robert Jackson Center for its first ever week of assemblies here. This is terrific. Robert H. Jackson Center is here for the purpose of enhancing the legacy of Robert H. Jackson. Who was Robert H. Jackson? You'll learn a little bit more today. But he was quickly born in Pennsylvania. Spent his time, early life in Frewsburg, New York. His professional life in Jamestown, New York, and ultimately ended up in Washington. Supreme Court Justice and Chief Prosecutor of the Nuremberg trial. We are thrilled that we've had as much activity as we've had here the last year and a half. Last night we had one of the Nuremberg prosecutors, Henry King, speak. The day before we had the official Nuremberg photographer, Ray D'Addario, come and present his photo exhibit, of which you will see around here, and hopefully before you leave you'll have an opportunity to take a look at that. In fact, Pam, maybe we can dig out some of those catalogs of the photo exhibit when they just hand them out so they can see what they're viewing. We've been on a roll. We're a little more than a year old, and this is the first time we've had an assembly of students.
The privilege of opening the first trial in history for crimes against the peace of the world imposes a grave responsibility. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored, because it
cannot survive their being repeated. That four great nations, flushed with victory and stung with injury, stay the hand of vengeance and voluntarily submit their captive enemies to the judgment of the law is one of the most significant tributes that power has ever paid to reason.
To make Germany the greatest country in the world, but who had instead crushed their country, indeed the entire continent of Europe. Indeed, the entire continent of Europe had exterminated millions of people, and who we now brought to trial to answer for their crimes against humanity. Their leader, Adolf Hitler, had committed suicide, and others followed his lead. The 21 brought before the judges here in Nuremberg were leaders, men of intelligence and character, but men who had perverted their power and led their nation to doom. They pleaded innocent. They said that they were merely following orders. And some were even braggarts who said that theirs was a just cause. The trial was more than an exercise in deciding their guilt. It would be a time for the world to know that inhumanity like this could not be tolerated for fear that it would be repeated. I was entrusted with the duty of lead prosecutor, and I was intent upon using international law to meet the greatest menace of our time, aggressive warfare. We would use the law not merely to determine punishment for these crimes, but we would establish a precedent by which all those accused of conducting aggressive warfare could be brought to trial. Nuremberg was a far distance from my home and my family, but it was where I needed to be at that time in my career of public service. February 13th, 1892. I was born in Spring Creek, Pennsylvania. Then at about age 10, my family moved to a small town in western New York named Frewsburg. Frewsburg was essentially a farming community, and I'm proud to say that many of my ancestors were people of the earth, people who worked long and hard, and who had concern for their family, friends, and neighbors. After my schooling in Frewsburg, I did 1 year of postgraduate study at Jamestown High School. And it was there that I was privileged, and I do mean very privileged, to meet Miss Mary Willard, who was to become my mentor. She taught me to think. She made me look deeper into things, and she led me to believe that I could become whatever I set out to be. I shall always be grateful to Miss Willard and to many other teachers who were interested in my education. I wanted to go to college, thought that I wanted to be a lawyer, but my father couldn't or wouldn't pay my way, but I was determined. I asked my uncle for a loan, he gave it to me, and I went, and I proved that I could do good. It was a proud day when I repaid my uncle. I didn't actually go to college. I went to what was called law school in Albany. And when I left there in 1911, I still couldn't become a lawyer because I wasn't yet 21 years of age. Instead, I went to work and read law. Reading law meant to work in a law office like an apprentice and learn from watching other lawyers. Just as a carpenter or a blacksmith might take on someone to be an apprentice, lawyers took on young students and teach them to be professionals. It was my uncle who let me read law in his office. I spent many happy years as a lawyer for the people.
Imagine that, a country lawyer without a college education as Attorney General for the United States of America. I was so proud. And then in 41, Franklin appointed me to the Supreme Court. Imagine. I felt very honored to be a friend and confidant to President Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States, died in 1945. Harry Truman succeeded him in that office, and it was Mr. Truman who asked me to leave my duties in the Supreme Court and to lead the prosecution team at Nuremberg at the end of World War II. Prosecutors from Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union joined me in forming a team to prosecute the wrongs that humanity could not endure. Our tribunal was a fair court of law. We honored the law and those who honored it. For 10 months, the eyes of the world were on Nuremberg, Germany, and on me. I was a long way from Jamestown. The swell of public service had engulfed me. I hope that those who live in this world beyond 1945 will think well of me. Imagine me, a country lawyer, Bob to my friends, Justice Jackson to others, speaking in Nuremberg for all of mankind. Speaking for those millions of people who died as a result of Nazi atrocities. Speaking up so that these crimes of humanity would not be understood for fear that they would be repeated. Imagine. Those days in Nuremberg are history in the making, well, as are all days if you really think about it. The events and the people, they need to be chronicled and studied in schools. Someday, maybe when I retire from public life and return to Jamestown, I'll have time to write that book. No, probably not. Probably some young lawyer or history buff will beat me to it. But I hope when they do, I hope that they treat me fairly. And when they mention me, I hope that they mention Jamestown and how it nurtured and sustained me.
For 10 months, both prosecution and defense teams paraded witnesses, hard evidence, statistics, and Nazi documents before the judges at Nuremberg. Exposed was a haunting tale of crime, inhumanity, mass murder, and bestiality which would cause the world to shudder. 17,000 pages of transcript resulted, and 18 of the 21 accused Nazi leaders were convicted. The trial was brought to a close on August 29, 1946. Mr. President and members of the tribunal, an advocate can be confronted with few more formidable tasks than to select his closing argument where there is a great disparity between his appropriate time and is available material. In 10 months, a short time as state trials go, we have introduced evidence which embraces as vast and a varied panorama of events as has ever been seen compressed within the framework of a litigation. It is impossible in summation to do more than outline with bold strokes the vitals of this trial's mad and melancholy record, which will live as the historical text of the 20th century's greatest shame and depravity.
These men saw no evil, spoke none, and none was uttered in their presence. When we put all of their stories together, this is the ridiculous composite picture of Hitler's government that emerges.
It was composed of a number 2 man who knew nothing of the excesses of the Gestapo which he created. A number 3 man who was merely an innocent middleman transmitting Hitler's orders without even reading them, like a postman or a delivery boy. A foreign minister who knew little of foreign affairs and nothing of foreign policy. A security chief who was of the impression that the policing functions of his Gestapo and SD were somewhat on the order of directing traffic. A party philosopher who was interested in historical research and had no idea of the violence which his philosophy was inciting in the 20th century. Now, this may seem like a fantastic exaggeration, but this is what you would actually be obliged to conclude if you were to acquit these defendants.
This was the philosophy of the National Socialists. When for years they have deceived the world and masked falsehood with plausibilities, can anyone be surprised that they will continue the habits of a lifetime in this dock? Credibility is one of the main issues of this trial. Only those who have failed to learn the bitter lesson of the last decade can doubt that men who have always played on the unsuspecting credulity of generous opponents would not hesitate to do the same now. It is against such a background that these defendants now ask this tribunal to say that they are not guilty of planning, executing, or conspiring to commit this long list of crimes and wrongs. They stand before the record of this tribunal as blood-stained Gloucester stood by the body of his slain king. He begged of the widow, as they beg of you, say I slew them not. And the queen replied, then say they were not slain.